Hey everybody, welcome back. Alright, so in this lesson we're going to start breaking the rules a bit. First off, we're going to do what is referred to as borrowing a chord. So this is where you borrow a chord from an adjacent scale. So the adjacent scale of E flat major is E flat minor. So it's pretty simple. It'd be the same if you're in sort of C minor. The adjacent scale would be C major. Okay, so fairly simple. And we're going to modify this chord, so it's basically, instead of playing a major, it's playing a minor. And it's as simple as selecting the middle note and dropping it down one. Literally, that's all it is. On the slightly bigger picture, if you put in all of the notes of the E flat minor scale, you'd find that D flat, which is this note, is in the scale. So this is the chord that you would get if you did a 5 chord in the E flat minor scale. This is the chord you would get here. And let's just compare that to how it was. So you can hear with the minor chord there, it just sort of makes it a little bit darker sounding, a bit more moody perhaps. And certainly once we finish sort of messing around with all of these chords, it's going to sound a lot more emotive. At the moment it's very basic. Obviously we've only got simple triads playing, so it's not really the final example, as you've already heard what it sounds like by the end of it. But this is just one more step towards it. Now, if you are sort of struggling to understand this a bit and you haven't really got much of a foundation in music theory, then definitely go and check out our Music Theory for EDM Producers course. It's called Killer Melodies, and it just really starts right at the very beginning and explains all of this really sort of broken down step by step, very easy to follow for people who are new to music theory and just want to basically be able to produce music and be able to write their own chord progressions and melodies. So definitely check that out if you're new to music theory. Okay, so next let's look at the last chord. So we're going to modify this and we're going to create what is called a 9 chord. And for this, I'm just going to copy up our reference notes, just so we've got another row of them, because it repeats obviously on every octave. It's the same notes in each octave. And what you can do to a chord is make it either like a 7 chord or a 9 chord. It's quite popular in sort of future bass type things, but it's also very useful in any other genre as well, just to get a different sounding chord and a bit of a different feel for your chord progression. So the way we do this is we just basically carry on with how we made the chord in the first place. So remember, we picked the root note, then we skipped a note in the scale, which is C, and we skipped a note in the scale and added another note. So all we're going to do is this again. So if we skip another note and then add another note, so if we draw one in here, that will be what is known as a 7th chord. So it's probably important now to discuss the difference between these numbers. Okay, so we've got what is called a 7 chord and then a 7th chord with a TH after it. And those two are very different things. So let's go through what the first thing is. So we already know that the chords are numbered depending on what the root note of that chord starts with. So if it starts with the tonic of the scale, it's a 1 chord, then a 2 chord, then a 3 chord, then a 4 chord, a 5 chord, a 6 chord, and a 7 chord. And then it starts again. We go 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, etc. And that works its way up in every single octave. But a 7th chord, as we call it, is a bit different. So a 7th refers to the tension of the chord. So just understand that the two of those are different. You've got the chord number, which refers to the root note of the chord. Then you can have a 3rd, a 5th, a 7th, a 9th, an 11th, etc. Now, how that works is every single chord that you've got, so this is, say, the first harmonic, the root of the chord, and then the second note in a triad is always a 3rd. It doesn't matter where the chord is, what note the chord is on, the second note is always a 3rd. And notice how I'm saying a 3rd, not a 3 chord. A 3 chord would just be a chord starting with G in this case, but a 3rd refers to the actual tension of the chord, and a triad is made up of 3 tensions. You've got the root note, the 3rd, and the 5th. So if you carry on from that, like we've done in this one, we've got a 1st, a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th. then you've got a 7th chord, and we just call it a 7th chord because you're using that particular tension. And again, if we want to do a 9th chord, then we can just do the same thing. We can skip a note in the scale and add a note on B flat. So now we've got a 9 chord, whereas before we had a 7 chord. It just has a very different sort of feel to it. So we actually want a 9th chord in this particular instance. Now, I know confusingly this is technically a 4 chord because it's on the 1, 2, 3, 4th, or the root note of this chord is on the 4th note in the scale. But because we're using a 7th harmonic, or a 7th tension, then that's why we call it a 7th chord. It's still a 4 chord, it's just got a 7th sort of tension. So there's just 2 different things there that you need to be aware of. So let's just play that. Okay, so it's starting to sound a bit better, but now we need to really expand on this and start playing with the voicings of these chords and adding some extra notes to sort of thicken them up a bit. Now, don't be put off by the term voicing. Voicing is actually a very simple concept. So when you change the voicing of a chord, let's just do it with the 1 chord. So you're not going to change the notes of the chord, you're just going to change their octave. So for example, if I just take the center note and I move it up by an octave, so I can either drag it up to the G up there, or a much easier way to do it is just to have it highlighted, hold shift on your keyboard and hit the up arrow on your keyboard and it'll jump it up an octave at a time. You can also use the arrow keys to move it up 1 semitone at a time as well. So this is exactly the same chord, or it's using the same notes, it's just got a different voicing because the notes are in a different position. And you just get a slightly different feel compared to how it was originally. Just sort of opens it up and gives a nicer sound. So that's what voicing is. It's really very, very simple, and you can do that to any note. We could change the A sharp, that could go down an octave, for example. It's still the same chord. It's just got a different voicing, or you could have it up an octave, for example. Same with the root note. It's still the same chord. We're just moving it around. Now, actually, before we go any further, I'm actually just going to highlight all of these last 3 chords, and I'm just going to hold shift and hit the down key just to move them down an octave. Just gives a slightly different feel to the chord progression, nothing major, just a little change there. And now let's start adding some extra notes. So let's start with the first chord in our progression, and let's duplicate the root note, and we're going to move that down 2 octaves. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option which changes my cursor to that scissors tool, but when I click it and drag it, so that's 1 octave. Now let's have it going down 2 octaves. So you can just add that sort of bass note to the progression. Let's also duplicate the B flat, so highlight that note and again copy it, and we're going to drag this down. And then we're going to change the voicing of the chord. Remember, this is sort of the original part of the chord, and we're actually just going to take the root note, hold shift and hit the up key just to space it out a bit. There we go. That sounds much nicer, doesn't it? Sounds so much better with the notes spaced out, slightly voiced, and with duplicates of certain notes as well. Okay, so let's move on to the second chord. So let's have this going up. So let's just change the top note, move it up an octave. Let's duplicate the C sharp, up an octave as well. So we've got 2 of those. And then our root note, the A sharp, let's have that duplicated. And again, we're going to do that again as well. Okay, let's have a listen. See how much more epic that sounds? It's way, way better. Let me zoom out a bit actually so we can see everything that's going on in our progression at one time. So we can see we're covering quite a few different octaves at the moment. Now, before we go any further, you're probably wondering, like, how on earth we got to this point, so how we really came about finding these notes, it was really important that you realise that finding the notes to duplicate or changing the voicing of some of the musical parts is not really, it's not some magical process, and it's not even particularly scientific unless you really know music theory, and then even then that will only get you so far. It's much more about experimentation and trial and error. So when I came up with these voicings originally and the duplicating the notes and everything, the borrowed chords, etc., I just really experimented with it until I had something that I liked. The only thing you need to know is what you can and can't do, or what's going to sound bad and what's got a good chance of sounding right. So what the tools are, like borrowing chords, like having 7th or 9th chords, like changing the voicing of the chords, things like that you need to know, so you can then experiment with those things, because these are things that are always going to sort of sound right. Even if it doesn't sound great, it's not going to sound horrible. It's not like just randomly changing the notes of the chord or something like that. You've got a purpose to what you're doing. So that's the important thing to note when you're experimenting with your chord progression. And again, I don't want to bang on about it, but if you really are new to this and you're not really totally grasping this, then definitely check out the Music Theory for EDM Producers, because it really is going to help you out. Okay, so let's get on to the third chord in our progression. So let's duplicate our bass note. Now we're getting a little bit too low here, really. It's still passable, but I think we might want to raise it up an octave. Now, just so you know, if you want to sort of change the entire chord progression up an octave, that's absolutely fine. You can just hit Control-A on your keyboard and then hold Shift and hit the up arrow, and that just moves every single thing up by an octave. So we've got... Okay, so it's fine. I mean, it actually sounded quite nice a bit lower as well, but for now let's just leave it like this. That's absolutely fine, and let's just carry on working on this chord. So let's change the voicing of our center chord, the middle chord. That's the A flat, so I'm just going to move that up 1 octave. I'll leave the C where it is, the F where it is, and let's also duplicate the G down there as well. Let's have a little listen. And let's just do our last chord. And for this, let's just duplicate our root notes down there. And that's probably all right already, because we've got just as many notes in here as we have with the other chords. And it's definitely sounding much better. Let's just have a little flick between some of these chords, so just to help it sort of flow together. So let's just change this. Let's just try going down to a G, which is not in this particular chord. You can also see, if you've got the chord editing selected over on the MIDI editor, when you select a chord, it actually tells you the chord name there as well. So this is an F minor, but if I select this, it's still an F minor, but we've changed it to an F minor 9, so it's like our last chord, which is a 9 chord, so that's an A flat 9, so we're changing this to an F minor 9. And then the last note, let's just change this as well, so let's shorten that one and let's go up to E flat. Sorry, E flat, not D. Oh, one last thing. Actually, I probably should have done this earlier, but the piano is a little bit loud, so let's just turn that down a bit as well. Okay, so we're starting to get there. Obviously, we need to now work on the second part of the chord progression, the next 4 bars. But we're going to get to that in the next lesson. So thank you very much for watching, guys and girls. I'll see you in the next one. And if this has been helpful to you, please do like, subscribe, and hit the alert bell so you don't miss out on future tutorials. Thank you very much.